What's going on, Facebook? This is George. It's 3 p.m. on a Friday in Brooklyn. And here we are, back with another live video. I'm just gonna wait a little while, see if anybody cares to join. Not that it matters much anyway, because you can't shut me up. Anyway, I hope you're all well. I hope you're all staying safe. I hope you're all staying sane. If you're watching this, give me a hello in the comments so at least I know who I am talking to. If you don't want to do that, that's cool too. Nevertheless, let me know what's going on. I hope you all, as I said, I hope you're all staying sane. These are crazy times. These are definitely not sane times, and whatever we can do to keep us going. Hey, what's going on, Taylor? Yes, you finally caught one. I'm so happy. Excellent. Um, what's going on, Chrissy Martinez? So glad that you're here. Finally, a couple ladies. What's going on, Joey? It's usually these live videos are beset with men. I'm very happy to have a female audience today. That's two thumbs way up. I usually don't get female audiences. So this is great. Uh, as I said, I hope you're all doing something to keep you sane. I hope you're all doing what you can to stay safe out there, because we're still in the middle of this pandemic, and it's not letting up. I think the latest numbers are 160,000 dead, which is terrible. All right, and anything we can do to stay safe and keep each other safe and each other sane is something that we need to do. So, well, Chrissy, I'm so happy that I take it that emoji means you're getting to do your nails while listening to this, which I think is a perfect use of time. Okay. I'm glad you wore out those Badu cassettes because I'm right there with you. Let's see if I can scroll this down or something. Oh, whoops, scrolled the wrong thing down. Anyway, um, I hope you all enjoyed the last 2 weeks where I was focusing on um, the great Buddy Williams and what he had to say and what inspired him and what inspires him and all of that. I certainly got a lot of good info out of that. And I'm in the process of writing out some notes from those two interviews or from those two conversations, I should say, and I will post them on the Georgia Space Chat group page as well. I highly recommend looking them over because there's there's a lot of information that comes at you when you're talking to someone like Buddy, and it is easy to leave some of it behind, but all of it is important and all of it matters, at least to me. So that's why I take notes, and that's what I do. What's going on, Leo Smith? I'm trying to tell y'all something good, so take notes. Just pay attention. Anyway, um, I hope you're all well. And so as I said, the notes with Buddy are coming. Feel free to share them. Feel free to act on them. Check them out. Make playlists. I did see um, this post from No Treble um, about the most influential tracks that Chuck Rainey did in his opinion, and I made a playlist of that when I first saw the article, which was a couple years ago, and I posted it also on the Georgia Space Chat um, page. So check that out. I find that work to be incredibly interesting and very very fulfilling. It really enriches your playing. It gives you a sense of of knowing what to do and coming out of a close um, observation of what makes you tick, what speaks to you musically, emotionally, perhaps even intellectually. Who knows? What's going on, Carl Latham? Good to see you, man. Can't wait to play with you again. And just before I get started on this week's topic, a little bit of housekeeping. Once again, if you are interested in getting in touch with me concerning lessons, concerning recordings, please don't hesitate to email me at george@georgefarmer.com. Hey, what's going on, Jackie Clark? You're only hearing me in one side. You know what? That's a reoccurring theme here. It might not be your headphones. There seems to be something going on with the Focusrite or with cables going into the Focusrite. Check this out. I'm gonna try. Maybe that did something, because now I got only one line going into the interface. Maybe that changed something. I've kind of given up on trying to fix that. So, um, I hope you guys can handle me coming out of just one side of your ears. Anyway, as I was saying, if you want to get in touch with me concerning teaching, concerning recordings, george@georgefarmer.com is my email. In the description of this video, there is information if you care to donate to the cause. It does take time to get, and I will also put that information into the comments as we proceed. I certainly appreciate any and all donations that are coming my way. And while we're at it, thank you so much for everybody who has donated in the past. I truly appreciate it, and I hope that I can continue to send some good information your way and perhaps motivate however I can, however, via using topics that interest me, What's going on, Marco Panacea? Kevai. Let's see, I could hear it try to come in. It's fine though. Okay. Well, cool. All right, so without any further ado, let's get into it for this week. The topic of this week's live video is Erykah Badu's album Baduizm Live, and it's it's a funny. I find myself in a funny place when trying to talk about it because I think Quincy Jones uses the word analysis paralysis sets in. It's almost as if there is too much going on with this album for me to really talk about it, for the thoughts to kind of all come to something, to some coherent statement. So every now and then, while this is going on today, you will hear me going into sort of a free association listing of names, events, songs, whatever. Understand that's where I'm coming from. I find this album to be extremely important, and I know it was for me, and I think that perhaps in a general sense, it is just as important for a lot of other players. And every now and then, I don't know, for whatever reason, this album, or thinking about this album, talking about it, inspires free association, rambling, you know. But interestingly enough, I always find that to be, at least what this topic is concerned, very, very useful, because every now and then one of these thoughts sticks, and you're off on a path that leads you into finding some new music, finding new players. And that's kind of how I feel about this album. I think it's one of the greatest, one of probably my biggest influences so far. It came out in '97. I had just moved to the US. I moved towards the end of '96. So by the time that album came out, I happened to be back in Europe on tour, and I got a cassette tape just like Chrissy of the album. While being on tour, we would listen to it. I think I still had a car at the time, and I had a cassette tape, this a cassette deck in the car. So we would listen to it over and over again, and just really couldn't believe what we were hearing, because what came out of those speakers was so clear and was so defined. Um, it defined the genre of modern R&B, at least for me at the time. I wasn't really that aware of the Roots or D'Angelo or anybody else. Um, but I was aware of Erykah Badu. I wasn't even aware of her studio album, truth be told. My first introduction to her music was via this live album. And so, and here we go. I mean, this is where we get this is where it gets tricky. Uh, a live album, to put out a live album in '97 apparently was not what you did. Um, this was at the end of the whole MTV Unplugged series. Um, so there was somewhat of a push towards live music. Nevertheless, um, I can't seem to find that many live albums right around that time. And interestingly enough, um, ever since then, I was able to, and I'm a big fan of live albums. I really enjoy that kind of album, that kind of format, so to speak. Um, Ever since that album, it's been very difficult to find anything else live. But for me, Baduizm live is in the same category as Billie Holiday at Carnegie Hall. It's in the same category as Aretha Franklin live at Fillmore West. Let me see, I made myself some notes here. Um, oh, yeah, Donny Hathaway live at the bitter end. Curtis Mayfield live at the bitter end. King Curtis live at Fillmore West, which is the companion album to Aretha Franklin's live album. Of course, P Funk live. And then Rufus and Shaka Khan live, I believe, at the. Oh, now I forgot the name of that album. Live at the Savoy, I think it's called Stomping at the Savoy, with the great Bobby Watson on bass. And then, of course, later on, you have the Roots come alive, and you have the Jill Scott Experience. That album is called Three Something Something, like three numbers. Anyway, it's a fantastic live album as well. So, nevertheless, my point is that Erykah Badu's album is, for me, is just as important as all of these classic albums. And of course, that leads me to ask, well, why the hell does it, you know, do I vibe with this album so much? This. So of course, my brain kind of goes into some sort of analysis, and so let's take a look at the ingredients and take it from there. Um, we have a small band, right? Three-piece band, keyboards, bass, and drums. And also, I should tell you guys and ladies who the players are, because that is very, very important. Um, Here we go. All right, we got Poochie Bell on drums, Hubert Eves the fourth on bass, and Norman, what's his name? Norman Hurt on keyboard, and I guess his nickname is Keys. Um, so three instrumentalists, three background singers, Ndambi, Karen Bernard, and Joyce Strong, and Erykah Badu. So altogether 7 people on stage here in New York. Chrissy Martinez, thank you. Experience Jill Scott 826 Plus. That's the live album I was talking about. Fantastic album as well. So altogether, 7 people up on stage, and the output is crystal clear, right? Um, the, for whatever reason, there is no. What's going on, David White? Good to see you. Awesome solo album. Pooja Bell's got an awesome solo album. Yeah, I don't doubt it. The dude is fantastic, really. Um, so clarity, right? Comes through with this album. There is intent, clarity of intent. And I guess one of the takeaways for me was, or and still is, because I find myself listening. It's one of those albums, and I talked about this last week as well. It's like Never Too Much. Before you know it, you listen to the entire album. You can't stop listening to it. You go from one song into the next, and that's the same experience I have when listening to Baduizm live, um, which actually makes transcribing it very difficult because your mind is just woof, gone. Anyway, um, uh, so we have this very, very stripped down band, right? We have 3 background singers, 1 lead singer. Um, Everything is kind of distilled to its essence, okay? And out of that comes an enormous sound. And at least for me, one takeaway is that if your intent is very, very strong, is crystal clear, if your concept of what you want to do is really clear, you don't need a lot of instrumentation. You don't need a lot of instruments, and you don't need a lot of players. You don't need a lot of singers. There doesn't need to be a choir in the background. 3 ladies who are badass. Okay, let's also just say that, like, what these background singers are doing is so on point. Um, you don't need much more. What these instrumentalists were doing was so defined and so on point, so distilled down to its bare essence. Now, that it sounds easy, but try playing it, and I find that all the time. Like, try playing some of these lines that are deceptively easy, or at least they sound easy. All of a sudden you realize, wait a second, there's so much more going on. There's phrasing, there is, of course, since I'm a bass player, I talk from the perspective of a bass player. There is ghost notes, there is all these little melodies and hooks inside of hooks, basically, that that grab the audience's attention. So that I find, again, the intent and the concept was so put together and so distilled that it didn't need a lot of instruments. It didn't need a big band. It was Everything was right there, and it comes at you in full force when listening to this album. So that was one of the takeaways that just kind of blew my mind a little bit, because at the time, and also I guess until today, although I think that the scene has changed, and general likes have changed, and our general tastes have changed. Um, a regular R&B gig always kind of involved a rhythm section which was at least a 4-piece, meaning drums, bass, guitar, keyboards, right? Um, and you had, of course, drums and bass kind of holding everything down, and guitar and keyboards adding colors via harmonies and all of that stuff. Now here you have no guitar, right? You have a keyboard player who clearly is using 2 keyboards or has divided it up. But also the parts that he's doing are, interestingly enough, not always happening at the same time. So what I mean by that is he plays one instrument once and then goes to another instrument for, say, the bridge. So all of these choices that were made resulted in an incredibly what's the word I'm looking for? In an output that was very multifaceted, to use a big word. For some songs, you have just the bass and drums on one verse, right? And then you have a breakdown section with no bass. All of a sudden, there's room, right? Another thing that I noticed was the tempos, and that actually brings me to the fact that they quoted, meaning as the entire ensemble with Badu leading them, quoted other music a lot for this live album, in this live album, I should say. So, I wrote these down because I wanted to, now I can't find it. That's interesting. My phone sometimes does that where it makes my notes disappear. So anyway, this is perhaps where I have it. Okay. Here's some of the albums that are being quoted. Obviously, So What, right at the beginning. The song So What from Miles Davis's album Kinda Blue. Funkin' for Jamaica, Tom Brown's album. The song Searching from Roy Ayers' album, I forgot the name of that album. It'll come to me. The song Stay from Shaka Khan and Rufus's Live at the Savoy. And then Boogie Nights from the band Heatwave, which was written by Rod Temperton, who later on, after leaving Heatwave, became very famous by writing a lot of material for Michael Jackson. So all of these songs were being quoted, and the band and the singers seemingly with a complete ease and control of the material go back and forth between quotes and original material. And that is something that I believe at the time when I first listened to this album, I certainly did not understand that. I did not know where this music. I knew So What. Okay, well, it's the biggest selling jazz album of all time. Kinda Blue is. So, of course, I knew So What, but I certainly didn't know Searching. I had no idea where Boogie Nights came from. I only knew that Shaka Khan, the Stay, was a Shaka Khan tune because she says it in the album. So, that was, again, there's a lot of music that was missing, in Austria. Nevertheless, this three-piece band manages to play all of this music with a fullness of sound and a richness of arrangements, even though it's just a three-piece band. It's basically a piano trio if you distill it down to its bare ingredients. Why is that? How is that possible? Well, perhaps one answer is because I don't know. I cannot proclaim to know these musicians very well. I do follow Hubert Eves on Facebook and Pooji Bell, of course, on Facebook, or in social media, I should say. But I don't know them personally. I know that they're still active. I know that Hubert Eves comes from a very, very musical family. So apparently, and Buddy told me this last week as well, apparently he's been around music his entire life. And of course you hear that, right? But all of these sounds and all of these songs were kind of um, in these musicians already, in their musical DNA, in their psyche. And when it came time to play what's called play a style or play a song, they were able to get those songs out and have a very strong understanding of what the original sounds and what they need to do to make the essence of the original sound come to life in a new setting, right? Because the original to Heatwave has horns and strings and keyboards and whatnot, to Boogie Nights by Heatwave, right? Has It's a huge arrangement, right? What can we do now that we just have a three piece? So where are the most important parts, right? If you lived with this type of music long enough, or with any type of music long enough, you are able to define and distill and get to the essence of these styles, and then you can put them into whatever the new setting is, right? In this case, drums, keyboards, and bass, right? Um, so this really strong understanding of what the originals sound like, right, um, is invaluable and clearly invaluable. So that was one takeaway. There's another takeaway that I get from listening to this album. That only and that kind of quoting all of these songs puts it into perspective, puts the at least in my opinion. Again, I'm not a music historian. I am not a teacher as such, but I'm sharing just my thoughts about this album that happens to influence me quite a bit. Um, so understanding and having a really good understanding of the music of 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 the original songs that they are quoting, that are being quoted on this live album, uh, puts the live album into perspective, right? And it makes it, if there ever was, and this is where I'm getting into trouble with this album, because in my opinion there's so much going on that it's difficult to just focus it on one or two items. But if there ever was an example of knowing where you're coming from, meaning where you're coming from musically, right? I believe this is a great example for that. The great Rufus Reed says in his book, The Evolving Bassist, like, no matter what style of music you play, it's always important to go back to the origins of that style. And to be quite honest, I never really understood that. But after listening to Baduizm live, I got it. All right. Um, I totally I totally understood what he meant. Right. It is so important to get the phrasing from kind of blue and see the lineage going through and have that in your musical DNA, and then bring it out in a situation that has superficially very little to do with kind of blue, right? Because totally different era, totally different music, totally different instrumentation, totally different everything. Instrumental music versus vocal music. I mean, this doesn't get more like that. There's hardly more of a difference right there. But knowing kind of blue really well made it possible for this album to come out and sound as strong as it does. I have no doubt about that. So this is for me a perfect example of knowing where your music comes from, knowing where your styles come from. And I also I want to I don't know whether I want to play anything today. We'll see. Usually the minute I play some music, either Facebook and then later on YouTube, um, uh, shuts it down, basically shuts the video down or shuts the sound off. And these are copyright issues that I totally understand and that I don't have a lot of control over. Nevertheless, I did put up another link to a playlist, and I highly recommend going to that playlist, liking it, also following me on YouTube and whatnot, because it does, this information definitely lives on over there if it doesn't live on here on Facebook. So keep that in mind. I think it is a good addition to what I am talking about, um, and especially for us bass players, Hubert Eves is. I highly recommend checking this dude out. Okay, there is nothing about his playing that is um I don't know. There's no bad word. There's no negative word that comes to mind when I think about Hubert Eves playing. It's just positives. His sound, his choice of notes, his reharmonizations, his rhythmic accuracy, uh, his pocket uh, are superb. Okay, I'm always surprised that for whatever reason, he doesn't get more props than I think he should. Or maybe he does. I'm not, I'm not that familiar with the rest of his output. Um, I did see him once at the now defunct Izzy Bar on the Lower East Side in Manhattan. And he was playing with a singer-songwriter, with a rock artist called Sonny. Um, and it was a great concert, needless to say. Uh, so check out Hubert Eves. The dude has an incredible knowledge, clearly, of music. He has one of the baddest sounds, and the best, I should say, one of the best sounds that I can think of. It's they're really in terms of, and there's one or two videos floating around YouTube that show Erykah Badu with her band at the time, right around 97, 98. Um, and that, in my opinion, that I believe show Hubert Eves playing the bass. On those videos, he plays a Music Man, for what it's worth. Now, is that a Music Man on the live record? I cannot tell. And I'm pretty good at picking up what instrument was used, but I cannot tell. Um, if anybody knows, put it in the comments. That would certainly be an interesting challenge. I know that there are pictures of him with MTD basses, and I probably should have perhaps tried to reach out to him and see whether I could get him to join me here. But I don't want to be intrusive. So, nevertheless, um, where was I? See, this is how I get with this album, right? There is so much music coming out. I wanna give a special shout out to these background singers, because very very often these ladies are being overlooked, and for me, from to, for my aesthetic, the sound of their voices with Erykah Badu's voice on top of that is, for a lack of better description, perfect. It doesn't get much better than that. And I do want to shout out their artistry, because from what I can tell, these background parts are not easy. And of course, I don't know, excuse me, I don't know whether there were any overdubs with this live album. I don't know whether they fixed stuff after, the recording or whatever. But for the sake of this video, let's just imagine that there were no overdubs. And I should have brought the book. There's one book that always comes to my mind when I listen to this album, and that is the book Zen and the what's it called, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. So again, here we go with the free associating. Um, that entire book is written about the definition of quality, and this, sort of one of the takeaways from the book is you can't really define quality, but you will see it, hear it, feel it, taste it. You will experience it when you experience it. Listening to Baduizm live for me is quality. That's when I experience quality. That's the level that I'm trying to get my playing to be. That where I'm trying to go. When I'm recording, I imagine that Baduizm live was recorded live with no overdubs. And what you hear is exactly what happened that night. Whether that is true or not doesn't really matter. But for me, in terms of inspiration, that's my that's my benchmark. That's where I'm trying to be, right? So yeah. So I'm glad, Matthew Carroll. Thank you. I'm glad that the whole sin in the art of motorcycle maintenance, that reference doesn't get lost. Anyway, it's I know this. I'm grasping at straws here, but again, that album is has that effect on me for whatever reason. Also, so that's kind of the musical side of it, right? That doesn't even start to uh, give credit or props to the awesomeness of Poochie Bell. Okay, I saw Poochie Bell live with Marcus Miller, and I might be sharing too much, but I've had seeing live music. I've had two, I don't know what to call it, religious experiences in my life so far, and one was seeing Marcus Miller live with Poochie Bell on the drums. The other one was seeing Michelle and Dege Cello at the Bowery Ballroom. Poochie Bell is rock solid in on this album. There's no there's I always liken it to listening to Bob Marley and the Wailers, because when listening to the Wailers, you don't hear all of the nuances, all of the intentions. There's no wasted intent. There's no wasted anything. Forget about the notes and the rhythms. Like, all of that is already there. But I get the same sense of, again, there's that word, quality, when listening to Poochie Bell on Baduizm Live. There's no wasted effort. Everything is at the highest level, and everything is at the highest intent. There's no wasted note, at least not to my ear or to my aesthetic. I find that remarkable. That is a remarkable achievement. And anybody who records music or plays music for a living knows that how easy it is to kind of fall or slip into a statement, a musical statement that is not 100% on point or 100% intended. Let me put it this way. How easy it is to kind of slip into moments where you rely on stuff that you have played before, and all of that, and it does take away a little bit of your immediacy, right? I don't get that from this album, and I certainly don't get that from Poochie Bell's playing on this album. Never mind all the other Keith Hurt and Hubert Eves playing this. That there is no wasted effort. Everything is perfect. Um, did they set out to sound like that? I don't know, but for me, that's a benchmark that remains to that still remains to be achieved, um, and that inspires and motivates me. So that is something to keep in mind. What else can I say about this album that I have not rambled about? Oh yeah, I wanted to shout out the background singers because those vocal arrangements are not easy, and I already said that, but I also wanted to kind of put them into a reference that goes back to the other live albums that I mentioned earlier. And just as an example, Aretha's Live at the Fillmore. And I think Aretha Franklin had also three background singers, maybe four, but definitely three. Um, when you hear Aretha's Live at the Fillmore, the first track, I believe, is Respect, which is at a breakneck speed. Um, I'm working on a transcription of Jerry Chamart's bass line for that. Nevertheless, these background singers are so on point um, with all of their backgrounds, with the big shouts, with the small phrases. Everything is on point. And for me, the three ladies who sing background on Baduizm Live, again, Karen Barnard and Downby and Joyce Strong, are every bit as good. That's kind of, I see a lineage there. I see, yeah, a lineage of quality. Let me put it like that. That's once again, I see the same quality, or I hear the same quality in the background singers for Bob Marley, because that stuff's not easy to do. That's everybody who plays orchestral music knows that. Um, when you are second, third, fourth, fifth instrument in your group, um, and your group doesn't play for 20 bars and then has to come in and sound pristine, that's not easy to do. And perhaps I'm wrong in seeing it like this, but for me, the background singers are like that, because they're not like us, like the rhythm section. We play all the time, right? Background singers have to come in at the right time with the right notes. They really only have one um, one chance of getting it right, right? So I want to give these ladies big props, because in my opinion that's a high art, and what they contribute to the sound of this album cannot be underestimated. Once again, we have only three instruments, and three background singers, and there you have it. There you have a full sound. Very, very limited. Maybe there is something to. I heard this. I heard Marcus Miller talk about this in an interview, where he says that limitation is sort of a great source of creativity, and perhaps this album can be seen as an example of that as well. Whether that was intended that way or not, I have no way of telling. But clearly, they were using the limited instrumentation, the limited, abilities of just three voices as opposed to five, six, 10, whatever. Um, and they were trying to get the most out of that. So the only way to do that is when your intent is crystal clear, when you know exactly where the music is coming from, where you yourself are coming from musically, where damn, you need to be damn sure where your likes and dislikes are, right? Um, One other thing that I wanted to bring up, and that is this is kind of tricky to put into words, um, but I want to give props to whoever was in charge in putting this live album out. Okay, I think that in '97 that was not, and I said this at the beginning of the video. Um, I don't think that in '97 you had a lot of live albums out. I think that during the '70s, definitely '70s, perhaps in going into the '80s, you had more live albums. Once the '90s came around, that was perhaps not that much that often done, right? Um, with the whole MTV Unplugged scene, perhaps that influenced it. That stripped down instrumentation, smaller audiences. Perhaps that had something to do with it. Nevertheless, I mean, Baduizm Live is not an MTV Unplugged album, not by a long shot. There's keyboards, there's electric bass. It's not an unplugged album. Has that trend? Did that trend influence whoever was in charge in putting that album out? Perhaps, and I want to give props to that person. I'm not entirely sure who it was. I know that Kedar Massenberg was somewhat involved, who is, I believe, a manager and or a record producer. I know that Norman Hurt, the keyboard player, also has a producer credit, and of course Erykah Badu. And perhaps that is the most important person here, because she heard the necessity of documenting. And again, I am just assuming here right now. I'm definitely making this up, but perhaps she did hear the necessity to document this band, this particular time, the interpretations that came out of playing the Baduizm, the studio album, playing that live, and she heard something there. So big props to her for having the imagination and the will to follow up with that. There's a moment in the album where she talks about Tyrone, the song Tyrone, and how that came about. And I also thought that, as with so many things about this album, it kind of puts a lot of things into perspective. She talks about the fact that she heard the keyboard player fiddle around with chords at a sound check in London, and she just freestyled some words over it, and that's how the song came to be. Anybody who has played in bands before knows that that's how songs are written, and that makes it an authentic and true statement. For her to put that statement out there in front of a mass audience takes a lot of guts, takes a lot of courage, and is invaluable to the audience, to the people who are listening to it, and I'm not only talking about musicians. We musicians are a small part of the greater audience, but the greater audience perhaps does not know how songs come to be, right? For her to put that out there and just say, this is how this happened, means the world, because all of a sudden the audience is drawn into the creative process. And does it matter a lot to them or not? Of course, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know that. Nevertheless, I think that kind of information is important to share with the audience, and I want to give her props for sharing it. There's some incredible mojo going on with this album, which makes it very, very difficult to talk about. There is one more thing that another thing that I noticed, or that I take away from this album, and that is, as a bass player, um, number one, if it sounds easy, it probably isn't. Um, Very often that seems to be the case. Great artists, be it a Hubert Eves or a Ron Carter, or name any bass player who inspires you, any musician, any instrumentalist or singer that inspires you, make their job sound easy, right? And you could make an argument for that we're supposed to make it sound easy, okay? The audience is not there to see us struggle. Definitely not. Yet it happens more often than you think. Um, Nevertheless, so number one, if it sounds easy, it probably is not, right? And number two, another takeaway that for me as a bass player was, um, the less you play, the more difficult things get. The louder you play, the more difficult things get. And that very often, when I introduce that thought to either a student or fellow musicians, that raises some eyebrows. Um, because there's, as this, we are unfortunately in these times where cynicism is everywhere, and we have to fight like hell against it. So the first thing that very often that I hear was, well, if you play less, you should be happy. You don't have to work so hard. Well, if that's your only approach to playing music, then I'm sorry, you're kind of missing the point by a long shot. But if you, let me just, the example that I always come up with is if you have something up tempo, in the span of what it took me right now to snap out this tempo, you could have played X number of notes, right? And it is debatable whether the audience or anybody on stage is able to really hear if there's one or two notes wrong, right? Fast tempo, a lot of notes. Every now and then, you'll slip. You'll, a wrong note will make its way into whatever you play. Is it really that important? Is anybody going to need to hear it? Probably not. Now, try that tempo like, whatever you play in that tempo, everything is going to be heard. All right? So, slower tempos, less notes equals more precision in your output. Like, you have to be more precise. Your notes have to be really thought out. And whatever your phrasing is, whatever your melodies are, they need to be really strong. Because in a slow tempo, there's no hiding place. You can't hide. And there are a lot of players out there who hide in plain sight. It's something that I can't even listen to, because it's like nails on a chalkboard for me. That doesn't work with slower tempos anymore. And it also does not work when playing loudly. And with Baduizm Live, you hear, again, you only have 3 instruments, so all 3 instruments are to a certain degree featured, right? Nevertheless, you definitely hear more of the bass than you would have heard in any other setting, right? Because there are simply not that many other instruments there, right? As I said earlier, sometimes they use the scarcity of the instrumentation to their advantage by just having bass and drums with the verse, or just having keyboards and drums with a breakdown section or whatever the combination might be. So all of a sudden, there is more emphasis and more volume simply by the fact that there's no other instrument there that's coming from the bass. And more volume means more difficulty. There's just no two ways about that. All of a sudden, all those incoherences or subtle flubs, or every time you touch the wrong string, everything is amplified and everything can be heard. So again, these are takeaways that I am getting from Erykah Badu's Baduizm live. I find listening to the album. It's been over 20 years now that this album has been out there. Let's see, this is 2020, so it's 23 years. My me being in awe of this output and this album has not changed, and that is, again, for me, coming from perspective of a musician, that that is a great achievement. That's the great achievement of the people who made the album, who had the vision to put it out there, who contributed to it, and it, in my opinion, it's a test of time for the album. It's also the fact that there's an interesting dynamic happening where in '87 we still had albums, period. And this is not me, the old dude, complaining about the state of the business. There's a lot to complain about, but that's just a fact. In '97 we still had albums. Now we don't have that anymore. In '97, there was also still more of an influence of record companies over artists, whereas nowadays that is almost non-existent. So it's an interesting balance that was perhaps tipping one way in '97 and has tipped or is tipping the other way now in 2020. That is entirely possible. It's entirely possible that our outputs now, the way technology is working, the way there is less of an influence from record companies, now there are no more gatekeepers. So all of a sudden, everybody can put an album out, right? And yet, very few people do that, and very few people do put live albums out. And that is also something, it's also a takeaway for me. I do need to acknowledge that, the industry, just like life, is changing, has changed, is going to continue to change. Back then, we still had albums. Now, we have mostly singles, I'd say. Yet you do find artists who put out live albums as well. I mean, I am a big fan of the Tedeschi Trucks band, and they definitely, I think they have 2 live albums out now, if not 3. So, yet I would love to hear and see a live album by Beyonce, by, and these are just off the top of my head. Forgive if this is now, again, this is the free associating part. Beyonce would be great to see in a live album setting, or great to hear in a live album setting. Thundercat, fantastic. I mean, I'm a great fan. I'm a big fan of his playing, of his music. I think he would really have something to say. Robert Glasper, of course, right? There's a band called Hiatus Coyote that I really like. They might have a live album out, I'm not entirely sure, but I would love to for that part of the industry perhaps to come back, or at least there to be an attempt, or maybe yeah, maybe an attempt of bringing that back, because I think there's a lot that needs to that can be documented that way, and that that could be interesting for artists just as much as for the audience to be drawn into each other's universe, so to speak. Um, so, as I said at the beginning, talking about this album presents a rare difficulty, because I think there's so much going on with this album that um, focusing on one or two points of concepts or ideas seems like a difficult task at time. Nevertheless, I encourage everyone to find your Baduizm life. I know what this is for me, right? But find your Baduizm life. Find that album that leaves you speechless, right? Just like I am, but that leaves you stumbling for words. and um and trying to make sense of it, right? Um, Find that album, and if I'm sure that whoever is watching this and whoever is listening to this, I'm sure that I'm not telling you something that you don't know, but I find it very enriching to find these albums, and I am forever grateful that this came into my life, because again, it is one of those definitions of quality for me. Um, it The whole lineage of live music, as I said earlier, the Billie Holiday live at the Carnegie Hall, Aretha Franklin, Donny Hathaway, Curtis at the bitter end, going into the Roots Come Alive, going into Jill Scott Experience. Like that whole lineage is fascinating for me to follow, right? Um, the intent that the musicians and singers, or let's just call it, because singers are musicians. I mean, who are we kidding here? That all of the musicians, the intent that all of the musicians exhibit in that album, the crystal clear focus, intent, concepts, call it what you will, all of that is nothing but inspirational. The drama that Erykah Badu portrays when singing the lyrics is also something that you that's all of that is textbook for me. Like that has, and that's why in the description also of this video, and in the flyers, leading up to today's video, I kept I kept thinking if I could come up with better words, and I really couldn't. But textbook and genre defying, was really what I came up with. Wait, what's going on, Carlos Madison Jr.? Good to see you, man. Um, you joined us just as I'm wrapping things up. I'm sorry, dude. So yeah, I strongly suggest, I strongly urge everyone, find your Baduizm live. It's, find those albums, and be specific about it. Be, you don't have to, you don't have to quantify your or qualify your decisions, or the reasons why certain output speaks to you. This it doesn't. It has to speak to you, nobody else. That's the important thing, right? Um, what else can I tell you about this album that kind of I know that in the late '90s, while living here and starting, getting my footing in the scene, all of a sudden you definitely noticed like there were more and more bands that were put together behind a singer, and especially behind a black female singer. So perhaps that album, since it was genre defining or it is genre defining, um, started, I don't want to say started that trend, but helped continue that trend, right? Um, but once again, and this kind of ties in with what I just said about Erykah Badu's performance, the theatricality of her performance cannot be underestimated and cannot be undervalued. I think that the minute she sings Tyrone, these themes of female empowerment, on and on, talking about African diaspora, talking about defining yourself, about. I mean, hell, there's this, at one song she talks about date rape. Now, all of that is so on point and is being performed and brought to the audience with a theatricality that makes it immediate. So that perhaps more than anything else influenced all the other artists that came afterwards, to have a female lead singer, with a backing band behind her. Um, Again, do I know this for sure? No. This is just my take on it. I'm sure that whoever is listening, whoever is watching this, has their own take of this. But for me, I don't know. I kind of saw an influence there, because at the time there were a lot of projects and jobs that wanted to sound like that. Let me put it this way: they wanted to have that Baduizm sound. They wanted to have that intimacy, and yet this very very I don't want to use the word, the very oh fuck it, I'm gonna use it. Very profound artistry. If Mark Gross is watching this, he'll get a kick out of me using the word profound. He likes to use it. So does Wynton Marsalis. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Anyway, so check out the album if you don't know it yet. Now you do. I highly recommend listening to it. I highly recommend going back and listening to the originals that are being quoted in the album, the songs that are being, used as covers. There is one thing that I'm just gonna put out there. There is a righteous bass sound on the original of Searching, the Roy Ayers song of Searching. I highly recommend checking that out because that is, I'm gonna try making a video about that. One of those sound recreations videos, because that I've never heard a bass sound like that before. Let me just put that out there. I've been a bass player for a couple of years now, so I highly recommend going deep, checking it out. It's a fantastic album. It's definitely, from at least for me, one of those albums that I cannot live without and that I don't want to live without. It has influenced me, not only musically, but as I said before, it is one of those definitions of quality for me. And for what it's worth, that in and of itself has made it into all of my output, right? That definition of quality has that kind of guides me in whatever endeavors, whatever projects I'm playing. And that's where I find the importance of an album like that is immeasurable. So check it out. find your own Baduizm live. Um, I can only recommend uh, that course of action. Um, I know that it has helped me and continues to help me. So I think I'm gonna leave it at that for today. As I said at the beginning, like I found this topic not easy to talk about simply because there is so much about this album. And I want to thank you all for spending an hour plus with me again. I hope that you all could find or could hear some, good information, some motivating information. Um, Check it out. Go deep. There's nothing wrong with that. I definitely enjoyed going back and listening to the album and putting the playlist together. Because it's an interesting uh, exercise in sitting down and listening to music. There's a lot going on outside, obviously politically, humanitarian, um, right and wrong, and whatnot. Nevertheless, this is one thing that we can do, and if we do it consciously, um, I think it influences how we live our lives on a very granular, very, very important kind of basis. So I highly recommend going deep, listening to finding your own Baduizm live. I know I found mine. And it's not the only one, by the way, not by a long shot. Um, so make that part of your daily routine, perhaps. I know when I go running in Prospect Park, that's what I listen to. I put one album on and listen to one album only, or take some time off and just start listening right here in my office or wherever I am in the house. I highly recommend that. This is the time to go inward and find definitions or renew definitions for yourself. I think that definitely helps dealing with all the bullshit that's happening out there. Um, and then also vote in November and vote these motherfuckers out of business because we don't have a choice. We need to get them. We need to get rid of them. There's just no two ways about that. On that happy note, once again, I want to thank you all for spending this time with me and check out this T-shirt I got from the Gullah Geechee Nation. Check them out on Facebook or on social media, wherever you can find them. This I should say, this is where Jameson came from. Okay, and that's why I'm wearing it. So, coming up, we have a couple. I have a couple interesting subjects. Um, the one that's coming up next week is the Willie Dixon special. Willie Dixon, very prolific bass player and songwriter in the blues era, and through that has influenced pretty much everyone from the Rolling Stones to Led Zeppelin to whoever else you can think of. Wrote songs for Muddy Waters, Coco Taylor, Bo Diddley, produced songs for Chuck Berry. One of those people who, without whom music as we know it wouldn't exist. Okay, Willie Dixon, very, very important gentleman from Mississippi and later Chicago. And I'm going to talk about him next week. The week after that, I'm going to do another show preparation video, this time for a show that I worked on in its workshop phase, called Stacks, which dealt with the life and times of the Stax record label from Memphis, Tennessee. which of course featured the music of Booker T and the MGs, uh, along with the music of Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, um, Isaac Hayes. Wow, fantastic. Um, so I'll talk about how I prepared for that particular endeavor, um, and I'll share whatever I could find. That my deep dive basically at least brought up for me. And then we're going into September, and I'm working on a couple more videos. One will be I'm trying to. A lot of my videos are about going back in time, going back at musical outputs and all that. I want to do. My partner Alexis brought this up to me the other day, and I thought it was a great idea. Because right now there's a lot of new music going on that I think deserves to be heard and deserves to be recognized. Um, so I'm gonna do a video about the my favorite bass performances in the last 5 years, meaning who were the artists, who were the bass players, what were the sounds, and all of that stuff. It's at this point still a little vague, but as we're getting closer, I'm kind of defining what that means to me. But I'm not talking about my performances. I'm talking about stuff that inspires me. I am going to do another video about an album like Baduizm Live, and that for me was Sting's Bring on the Night, the movie, and the accompanying live album. I have a thing about live albums, so expect to hear a lot about that. But that album again is one of those albums that meant a lot, right? Carlos, are you saying Stanley Banks is the bass player on the on? Oh, you're thinking I should make a video about Stanley Banks, or I'm trying to figure out why Stanley's name is appearing all of a sudden. Not that it shouldn't, because he's a great player. He really is. But let me know. So those were just a couple ideas that I'm going to, that I need to focus. But those are coming your way. And as I said earlier already, I want to thank you all for spending this time with me. I hope you got some good info out of this. Oh, okay, Carlos. Well, let me think about it and see what I can do about that. All right. Um, and as I say every week, um, be cool, be kind, and remember we only have each other. And I'll see you all next week. All right, later.